Hey there, Mr. B here. I want to give a quick tutorial on dividing fractions and multiplying fractions that will also help with some questions that we did on our homework tonight. But before we get to these big word problems, let's talk about the basics of dividing fractions and multiplying fractions. Students have done yesterday we had this sheet here where we had some examples. We talked about multiplying fractions. The basics are that you'll multiply straight across. So you can see how we end up with 8 over 15 just by multiplying like we normally would. Sometimes when you do that though, you end up with a fraction like 6/20, so that can be simplified. And so we try to simplify them if we can. In this case, we divided both the numerator and the denominator by 2, and 3/10 was as small as we could go on this one, whereas the other one was already in simplest form as 8/15. You also need to be able to change from a mixed number like 1 2/3. You need to be able to change that over to an improper fraction before you multiply. So we couldn't multiply like this here. We needed to make a change. We left 1/4 alone because it's already a fraction. 1 2/3 is equal to 5/3 as an improper fraction. The way we do that is to take the denominator and multiply it times the whole number. So 3 times 1 is obviously 3, so we're kind of holding that answer in our head for a minute. 3 times 1 is 3. And we take that answer and we add that to the numerator. So we're multiplying those two, getting an answer, adding that answer to the numerator, whatever it is. In this case, it's 3, it's 2. So 3 plus 2, that's where our 5 is coming from. The denominator stays the same, so we leave it alone. So now we're multiplying straight across, and we get 5/12. That's in simplest form. It's as low as we can go there. In this example, we changed 1 1/5 to 6/5 by following that same method, multiplying these two numbers to get 5, adding that answer to 1 to get 6, and then keep the same denominator. So 6/5 is the same thing as 1 1/5. We multiply straight across, and in this case, we get a fraction that can be simplified again. This one can also be divided by 2. We don't always divide by 2. We just divide by 2 if we can. So in this case, we could divide 18 and 20 both by 2. So we simplified it to 9/10. That's the basic idea of multiplying fractions. Dividing fractions is a little different in the sense that you don't really divide fractions. In order to do that, you really do this right here. You multiply by the reciprocal. So what is a reciprocal? Well, a reciprocal is taking a fraction like 3/4 and flipping it to 4/3. So 4/3 is the reciprocal of 3/4, and 5/12 is the reciprocal of 12/5. And since 2 is really just 2 over 1, that means that 1/2 is the reciprocal of 2. So in each of these cases, you're going to see where we've just flipped the number. We actually had a song that says, when dividing fractions, don't be shy, flip the second number and multiply. So in this case, you'll see 1/2 was left alone. The 1/5 was flipped to 5 over 1, the reciprocal, and then we multiply. Now we multiply straight across just like we did in the other examples, and we get 5 over 2. We don't want to leave this as an improper fraction, so we're going to divide it, and we're going to say, well, this is really just 5 divided by 2. So how many times does 2 go into 5? Well, it goes in there 2 times. The answer to that question is 4. So that means you've got 1 left over, and the denominator stays the same. One way for students to see that is to literally look at it like this: 5 divided by 2 instead of the fraction 5 over 2. 5 divided by 2. 2 goes into 5 twice. 2 times 2 is 4. Subtract, there's your remainder. So the remainder of 1 is your numerator. The answer 2 is your whole number, and the number you were dividing by is still the same denominator that you had initially. So the way we kind of like to look at it is 2 and 1/2, which is what you have here, 2 and 1/2. So no matter what the numbers are, you can use that strategy to change it. If you have an answer that's improper, you need to change it to a mixed number like this. In this case, over here, we flipped the second number and multiplied again. we had a proper fraction here, but it could be simplified. You could divide by 2 and simplify it down a little bit more. All right. If again, if you've got a mixed number ahead of time, before we do any flipping, before we do any flip the number and multiply, we got to change these. So using the same idea I showed you over here on this side, before we multiplied, we had to change this to an improper fraction. So before we divide, we're going to change that to an improper fraction. So 2 times 1 is, 2 times 2 is 4. Now we're going to add that to 1, which is 5. There it is. Keep the same denominator, 2. So 2.5 is the same thing as 5 halves. 3 times 3 is 9. 9 plus 1 is 10. That's where the 10 is coming from. Keep the same denominator, 10 thirds. So all I've done is change this and this to 5 halves and 10 thirds. I'm still dividing. And the next step you'll see where I have flipped the second number, and now I'm going to multiply. So now I can multiply straight across. 15 over 20. This can be divided by 5. This can be divided by 5, and now we have a fraction in simplest form. That's the basics of multiplying and dividing fractions. Students, we did all these examples together. I feel confident that they got a lot of practice at multiplying and dividing decimals. And I'm going to do one more video that's going to show how knowing that system for multiplying and dividing decimals, how knowing how to deal with that helps you with some of these bigger word problems. So check that out in the second video. All right. As always, thanks for watching.